Thanks everyone for joining us at the Project Censored radio show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your co-host Eleanor Goldfield, and we're very glad right now to be joined again by Martha Dimitratou, who's the founder and executive director of Repro Uncensored, a global nonprofit documenting and challenging systemic online censorship, AI-driven harms, and the influence of big tech on access to information, freedom of expression, and democratic participation. Repro Uncensored's research and investigations have been featured by hundreds of media outlets worldwide. And through Repro Uncensored, Martha also develops cultural initiatives and movement building projects that bring together art, technology, digital rights, and social justice. And we're glad to be joined for the first time by Caspar Pisters, who's the head of communication for Amsterdam's wonderful and notorious club church, with a background in journalism. Currently, Caspar does comms for the Dutch HIV organization. And Lotje Beek, who is a policy advisor at the Dutch digital rights organization Bits of Freedom, focusing on big tech and online platforms. She mainly works on digital rights within European platform regulation, and in that context, she advocates for the effective enforcement of the Digital Services Act. And Bits of Freedom recently won a court case against Meta platforms based on that law. So we're going to talk about Meta some today, which of course means that this probably won't get shared on Instagram, but that's fine. So let's start off here with just some basics to orient our listeners, particularly because most of our listeners are in fact in the evil empire known as the United States. So y'all are involved in a case against Meta, which, for those who don't know, is the parent company of Instagram and Facebook, evil Zuckerberg, etc. And as I understand it, it's a case that challenges the rights of corporations to essentially invisibilize already marginalized communities online, something that we see, or perhaps don't see, happening seemingly at an increasing rate, not just, of course, in the US, but as we're discussing here in Europe as well. So starting off here, what prompted the case that y'all have brought, and what are the main parameters of that case?
I can give a bit of a context on the work and how we all came to be. With Repro Uncensored, we've been documenting a lot of the censorship that is happening on platforms such as obviously Meta. Specifically, we documented a big wave of censorship back in November, December, with hundreds of accounts that were ultimately taken down in the US and globally. Many of the accounts were actually based in the Netherlands, including Club Church and other accounts like the Queer Agenda that we saw taken down. A lot of the accounts ultimately were put back up, but it took quite a bit of a process, whether it's like a mix between public pressure, press, trying to get contacts that we have within to ultimately get them back. It's very difficult to get the accounts reinstated. The redress mechanisms are harder and harder, despite having legislations in Europe that are supposed to protect account holders against this kind of discriminatory practices. What we're seeing later on in, I would say, April of this year is a second big wave of censorship that takes down also a lot of the same accounts that we saw in the first wave, including, again, Club Church, the Queer Agenda, and many other accounts like Tilatech and so on, that were like a lot of incredible cultural, queer, landmarks of the Netherlands. So it felt very, I think, relevant and important for us to come together and stand up against what we believe is discrimination against queer accounts in the specific case. And there are many other marginalized groups that are affected. Reproductive health, as you know, is one of them, and many other very important topics like sex workers and so on. So that's a bit how it came to be. My understanding of the law, and I'll stop talking, is that you have to be quite national in the way that you run this kind of like class actions, as in it made sense for it to be based in a specific country. We hope that this could build a good precedent to be applied in other countries within the EU and globally, as well as perhaps try to create better transnational, European class actions against big tech and beyond. So that's a bit how we came to be together. I don't know if anyone wants to add something.
Yeah, well, what was interesting to me is it indeed happened to a lot of queer clubs, and people started reaching out to each other. Like this happened to me, and I heard it also happened to you, and we were going back and forth with ways to try and get the stuff back. informing each other about other organizations that were being affected. And at some point, I realized that this was a network that was starting to be built. In a way, you could say Meta is organizing their own resistance, because they really are bringing us together to an extent that I have never experienced before. Even Amsterdam is not that big of a city, but many of these people from those clubs I met face to face now for the first time, and we have each other's numbers now. And yeah, so this is very interesting, and it also sentiments that I was having, frustrations, but also ideas of how are we going to move on. It really helped to be able to discuss those with other people in the same situation. Like, we had our accounts back, but for Church it was already the third time that we were kicked off and got it back again, to the point, because I'm expensive. If it start from a business perspective, it started to stop making sense to still try and be on the platform. We can't do without Instagram just yet. So much of our communication happens there. But to just keep on going there and hope and pray that we that we last a little while, that doesn't make sense. So something has to happen. Something had to happen, and we all felt that. And that I think that was very vital too, because probably everyone on Instagram at some point already has had that thought. Every queer person, for sure, like, should I be doing this? Apart from all the mental health aspects of being on those platforms, and the hours of our lives that we hand over to those platforms in return for cat videos and whatnot. I lost my train of thought, but yeah, it was obvious that that things have to change, and now there is the urgency that also makes that we're not just thinking about it, we're actually doing something.
Lotje, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can add maybe a little bit on the legal perspective, because in the EU we have this regulation called the Digital Services Act, which we as Bits of Freedom and many organizations within the digital rights groups have been working on for years. And that's actually the part that's super interesting to us, is whether Meta is obeying the law here. And because, like, Meta is allowed to take down accounts if only they are making sure to offer the safeguards that are in this regulation. And what Marta and we found is that many of the organizations didn't get, like, the legal protection that they are supposed to get when their account is taken down. So when Meta takes your account down, or takes your content down, or makes, like, any decision about your account or your content, they have to motivate that decision, and that has to be kind of a, like, broad motivation, like, what rule did you breach, and what exact piece of content was breaking the rules, and why was this piece of content breaking this and that rule, etc., etc. And then also, when they do remove your account, they have to offer you a way to appeal that decision. And we saw that in many of the cases, accounts didn't even get, like, any explanation. Some cases they got explanation that didn't make sense at all, and some organizations just got, hey, you breached Meta's rules, period. Which is obviously not enough for a legal motivation that they are supposed to give.
So, and this is something we've been seeing within the queer community now, but also outside of the queer community in so many places. So that's something that's super interesting to us, and definitely shows that we have like some legal ground to stand on against Meta, which we find interesting to battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, I mean, in the in the US, just a lot of things. But in the US, you never get an explanation and you can't appeal. I mean, you can try to, but I mean, it's like throwing stones at Mount Everest. But I'm curious, did anybody ever respond and say, "Oh, these are the rules you broke," or has it still been totally quiet and they've still not given you any even like paltry excuse as to why things were taken down?
No, there's zero. There's a standard prompts, although there's subtle variations in them. But it's just that also when we got our account back, thank you, Martha, we didn't get any. There was just a message, you can use your account again. And it didn't even feel good this time around. That is the weird part. Like we were like, yeah, for how long? So no, there's zero. And at some point, with this network expanding, more people know more. So you start sharing information. We have some direct contact. Admit I didn't reach out because that cannot be the way to solve your issue. That one guy's phone number that you happen to have. But that's it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I was gonna just add that what we get often is, yeah, that was a mistake, or it's just nothing. It's just we get the account back. And we are seeing that it's becoming harder and harder to reinstate the accounts. It's becoming harder and harder to get access to someone to get any kind of answers. And it's often the same accounts that get hit again and again. So there's no institutional memory that this keeps happening again to the same groups over and over again. And then, I'm not, again, an expert in law, but I think what's also very interesting to talk about is a bit, I don't know if Lotje you want to say, but GDPR, which is, a piece of legislation that is pretty robust, that is supposed to protect your personal information and data within the EU at least. But we've seen how you have like groups of accounts that are related to one account holder, let's say, whether because they use their email or their IP or whatever they use, and all of a sudden all these accounts are taken down together. That's not the way to go. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the content of the account, but with the actual user. So there's these kind of questions. And then I think what's also very important to stress is, the whole thing about freedom of expression. And I know the work that you all do with Project Censor. So, often we hear the anti-rights movement saying, yeah, we're getting censored. But the truth is that it's all these cultural incredible groups that keep getting taken down. And that goes very much against freedom of expression and freedom of speech, at least within the EU. So.
Yeah, and also these accounts shouldn't be dependent on organizations like Repro Uncensored to get their accounts back. Like, it should be accessible to them to appeal a decision that Meta made, at least in the EU. I'm very sorry to all the US listeners. But in the EU, it's obviously not working. So I don't know where you're going to be better off. So we sent a summons letter to Meta, which I'm sure we're going to get into later. But before that, these organizations have gathered a lot of media attention, which is great because then Meta can maybe feel a little bit more pressure. And in the media, at both the like waves of removals, Meta didn't respond for the first couple of weeks, and after a couple of weeks, they responded to like one or two media outlets with like insane explanations, saying this was a technical error, which is something they've been saying for like 1 or 2 years now every time something like this happens. So when people couldn't search for hashtag Biden or hashtag Obama or hashtag Democrat during the inauguration of Donald Trump, but also when young people couldn't search for queer-related content for months, they also said it was a technical error. So, like, pushing technical error as an excuse for this like super smart company every time something goes wrong that usually the same kind of like minorities are targeted at by. That's interesting to say the least. And also they respond once they've put in the accounts back after a couple of weeks after like Repro Uncensored intervened or whatever. Like when they put the accounts back, that's when they respond. No, but all the accounts are installed. So it's it's kind of weird timing. So we're not up until now we haven't been really happy with Meta's response.
And what I wanted to add, well, first of all, our accounts are reinstalled. So apparently, what it is that we were doing in the end wasn't wrong. Otherwise, I don't think we would have gotten it back. But what they effectively accomplish is by attacking some of us, they get to all of us, because even when we lost our stuff, there were some other queer initiatives that were hesitant about posting about it, because it injects a certain fear, like, oh my god, what if that means we're also being taken down. And it is very effective to accomplish that you start censoring yourself, and everything that you put out there. And I think that is why it's very important to push back.
Yeah, absolutely. The complying in advance and the self-censorship is really dangerous, and it can be slipped into so easily. And I, hearing y'all speak, it also highlights some things that that we experience in the U.S. The difference between like corporate queerness and like a grassroots. Like we like to say that the first Pride was a riot, and you're not supposed to have Lockheed Martin or the police at Pride. Like that's not what Pride is about. And and you think that places like the Netherlands, or right now I'm in Sweden, who has like a huge Pride parade and and everything's so great, unless the queers unless we like start acting up, right? Like we're supposed to be the nice queers that wave our national flags and serve in the military, right? But if queers start talking back and pushing back, that like grassroots, that dissident queerness is not okay. And so you see, like during Pride Month, of course, there's going to be pride flags plastered everywhere. Like literally weapons manufacturers have pride flags, which is but like it really makes that distinction much more clear. Like, oh, you can be queer as long as you're not loud or what we perceive to be annoying or too pushy about it. And so that really like shows that distinction with what Meta's doing, particularly against these accounts. And I wanted to ask you where the case is now. You mentioned, Lotje, you mentioned a letter. Can you tell us where things stand? Right now we're recording this, so folks are aware, we're recording this on June 8th. Obviously it's airing later, but what is the status now?
So I think like 10 organizations sent a summons letter to Meta. So that's mostly affected organizations and some supportive organizations like Bits of Freedom and Repro Uncensored. So a summons letter basically means that our lawyers sent a letter to Meta saying, hey, you haven't been following the law and this and that should change. These are our demands. And Meta has received the letter, and right now we're waiting for a meeting with them. And then, honestly, I cannot predict what will happen either in the meeting or after. Like, it's very hard to say. We've just we've been also as Bits of Freedom have been having a separate court case against Meta, and it's going like from left to right, up and down. So we got to be very flexible.
Yeah, I imagine the goal is to tire you out. And because they have, they obviously have no trouble finding and paying for lawyers. And I wanted to also ask kind of because Caspar, you brought this up too, like the effects that it has, both good and bad. You know, you've got the how this kind of seeped out of the digital space and into, as the kids say, IRL, in real life, actual organizing that takes place face to face, which I, as an organizer, think is the most powerful organizing. And then there's, you know, there's a saying in the US, you can't use master's tools to take down master's house. And so the idea that we would somehow be able to use tools like Instagram to most effectively, you know, shift the system or topple an empire is absurd. Because that is a part of empire. It is a digital niche of empire. So I'm curious, like, how has this then affected that digital space, but then also that in real life organizing, in this kind of feeling that, okay, well, then us queers have to find different spaces and different ways to promote our voices and to not be silenced?
Yeah, I think Meta is absolutely fine with you criticizing Meta as long as you do it on a Meta platform. They want you to engage in whichever way, angry, sad, happy. That's all good. The other day, I saw this nice sticker, "The future is offline." I made a photo of it, holding it in my hand, wanted it to post it on Instagram, and I was like, no. But we're not there yet. This is so fresh in a way that we all start feeling it now for like really in a different way than before. But that is quite recently. As a club, of course, we are about offline, and we are about people meeting each other on the dance floor. But yeah, we kind of handed over this whole communication aspect to Meta. And it also really feels like a breach of trust, because we used to have different ways of getting that information out there. And all of that is gone now. And yeah, how to rebuild that. We're very much in an early stage of that, so I can't really tell, but I can tell you that it's happening.
I think I would just add that we have been coming together within this incredible group, and also generally in thinking of alternative technologies and platforms of communication, you know, which by nature may be harder to move everyone to for multiple reasons, including the fact that we're looking for things that are less addictive, right? I mean, you know, so it's a bit of a paradox on its own. And then I think, yeah, doing as many events as possible. We also, with our colleagues, because there's a lot of accounts also in Germany that were taken down, just did two great events also called No Longer Online. There is efforts also in terms of policy and litigation. There was a lot of health accounts in France that were recently taken down. They're also reconsidering a bit, maybe doing a complaint as well. So I think coming together in a multi-layered way is important. I also think, obviously that education and thinking of ethical AIs is something important. Ultimately, it's engineers that set these things up. So I think just coming together in these multiple ways is pretty good. And I mean, what we've seen is how easily when you just poke into a specific community to find out a bit about what's going on in censorship, you all of a sudden have hundreds of accounts that are coming out, and saying that they've been censored. So I do really believe that, this podcast and just campaigning and awareness is very critical. I mean, and then there are other things that, just like a bunch of teen bans, as that are coming into effect. We also do a lot of work in Australia, for example, and are seeing how a lot of accounts there are just like taken down from the online. There just were like 30 cases this weekend. So understanding that there is a very regional on the ground pattern, but also like a global scale of how this is doing and how meta policies are affecting the world, I think is obviously very important.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to ask that too, because there's we talk about this on the show quite a bit, like the difference between self-censorship and framing things differently, right? So the way that I would talk to an anarchist in New York City is not the way that I would talk to a coal miner in West Virginia. I'm not self-censoring, I'm just speaking in a different way. So is there some of that too, like trying to, because a lot of this, as you've pointed out, Martha, is health information, or a lot of it, I grew up in the South in the US. A lot of the access, there wasn't much that queer kids had to information like, hey, we're not alone, was so vital for not feeling gaslit and not feeling like you were some kind of freak um, and shouldn't be here. So how can you kind of balance that, or find a way to balance that so you're not self-censoring, but you're still trying to get that information out there for the people who critically need it, who critically need that community?
I can. Do you want to go, Caspar? I can speak. Oh,
You're muted.
Sorry, I thought this question was directed at Lotje. Yeah, I'm very much of the generation that grew up without internet in those times. So I actually was editor-in-chief of a gay youth magazine for 5-6 years in my early 20s. And it was literally the only thing that was out there for young people, and we were probably one of few countries that had that. Yeah, that's online now. So also a lot of like it's almost like websites are not really a thing anymore, because you go where everyone else is, and that is on one of these platforms. So so much of the communication happens there that people are less, for Club Church, for example. Yeah, we have our agenda on our own website, but that's not where people go to per se to find information. They're used to having it fed to them on that timeline that we're scrolling for hours and hours in a day. So yeah, we will definitely need to make more use of our own website and see if that changes. Like for church, we're quite well known, so a lot of people will, if they don't find us, if they feel like going out, they will maybe reach out to a website. But I don't have a clear answer or indeed to your question.
Maybe I can add on from a digital rights perspective, because we always say that we love technology under our own conditions. So I feel like the power of technology can really help the queer community or any other community. I mean, like #MeToo started online. I know Black Lives Matter got so much attention through like social media. So the possibility of reaching so many people, especially in minorities or smaller communities, is amazing. But once these spaces start getting hostile against these communities, that's where it gets super difficult. And and I think so many makers or like event organizers, whatever, are dependent on these big tech platforms, which means they are dependent on like their rules and opinions, or maybe even political opinions at this point. And so we always try to move towards an infrastructure where organizations aren't as dependent on like only these big tech platforms. So as Bits of Freedom, we've been putting so much effort into our newsletters instead of just posting on social media or like big tech social media. And it's been really paying off. We have so much amazing engagement, but it also takes time and effort to like create these communities in other spaces. so we also don't want to tell the queer community, okay, move to another space, good luck, because it's not that easy. Like, these platforms are usually super user friendly and have a lot of users. So leaving is not an easy choice. And it also reminds me of, I think last year here in Europe, people wanted to get rid of WhatsApp. So a lot of people downloaded Signal, which is an alternative chat app. And we also told people, like, you don't have to like remove WhatsApp right away and only download Signal, but every conversation you're not having on WhatsApp but you are having on Signal is a win for your privacy and eventually for the world. So I think that's also kind of how we should see it with this movement. Like, step by step we'll get there, to be less dependent on big tech, but don't make it too hard on yourself and lose your entire audience, because like it's obviously super important to still reach queer people, young queer people, like anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I mean, I connected with Repro Uncensored via Instagram, so you know, it's always a mixed bag. And you know, like the Signal, anybody texts me regular, I'm like, get on Signal. But then the people that I connect with in Palestine, especially Gaza, they can't use Signal, so I have to use WhatsApp. So it's like there's always this nuance. Well, in the world, but also in tech. So yeah, I think that, I mean, there's so many more threads, and I feel like we could sit here and talk for hours until I go get my first glass of wine for the day, but y'all have lives to live as well. So, folks, do check out Repro Uncensored. They do incredible work, and we've actually collaborated with them on Instagram.
So many times. Yeah.
It's like the mafia. Like, it's like you try to leave, and then it's like, nope. Yeah, I feel like Al Pacino. Anyway, so do check out their work, and thank you so much, all of you. Martha, Caspar, Lotje, thank you so much for coming on the show, and even more so, thank you for the work that you do. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for
Sorry,
having us.
For having us and giving us a stage.